Hello and welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, the Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops and Detroit Bad Boys, a former D1 hooper, current high school coach, teacher, husband, and father of 3 amazing kids.
I'm Omari II, Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press.
Omari, we had one heck of a rating and review this week on Apple Podcasts. I think this was the longest one we've had, and I do want to give it its full credit because of that. We talk about all the time how we appreciate that our listeners are very in-depth with their ratings and reviews. So this was from Posco G. He says, love the podcast. Appreciate the work you guys put in. I think a fun tweak to the predictions you did this year is at the beginning of the year, picking one stat that is your main indicator on if the player is moving in the right direction and removing as much of the quote unquote, well, this isn't valid due to XYZ changing. I noticed a lot of the convo was around changes in role or defense versus offense. If you choose, for instance, Bay 3-point percentage, Stewart 3-point attempts, K turnovers, free throw attempts, Duren pick and roll defensive metrics, those feel all like truer indicators. They have less connection to team strategy, more focus on personal development. I know you can't really ever divorce the two. Anyways, just an idea to maybe up the fun on the prediction combos. Love the work from all you guys. Like I said, that was one of the longer ones, but I wanted to give its due credit.
Yeah, and also a pretty great idea. And, I'm all for stealing that for our iteration of that episode next season when we go through the mid-season review. So, yeah, we appreciate the in-depth comment and the love, Posco G. And just in general, we always love when people comment and tell us what they think or have any ideas or tips or anything else. So keep it coming, especially in the dog days of the season like this. It's just good to check the metrics every now and then to see that people are still tuned in. Although at this point, it's probably more so diehard fans than your casual fans. But either way, we appreciate it. If you have anything you want to tell us, good or bad, hopefully good, definitely let us know.
Yeah, I was just excited that we got a new rating and review. We've had a couple the last week. I felt like a lot of fans had checked out, so I'm glad people are still here with us listening, even as it's been a little bit of a roller coaster for the Pistons this season, and we'll get into that in a second. Also, a couple announcements, Omari, and I'm excited about both of the upcoming episodes. First, next week, there's only one game between this recording and that one, but we're going to be joined by a good friend of the podcast, Keith Smith. If you guys don't know him, he's like an NBA cap expert. He has the Front Office Show podcast, and he's going to come in, talk with us about the Pistons, salary cap, all of that stuff ahead of the trade deadline. I know you're really excited about this episode as well with Keith.
Yeah, it's always great talking to Keith. He's one of the best basketball minds on Twitter or anywhere really. And we had him on last year, and he was excellent as far as breaking down the Pistons cap situation and realistic trades, and also just to talk about the franchise in general and what they can and should do. So this one will be trade deadline focused, but always a great time having Keith on. If you guys have any questions or anything you want to send to us to ask Keith, feel free to do it. Me and Bryce, of course, are both on Twitter, so you can DM us or just send us a question there. But yeah, I'm thrilled to have Keith on next week. It'll be probably a week or 2 weeks before the deadline. So the timing there will be perfect. And of course, I've reported that I don't expect a very busy deadline for the Pistons. I know teams are calling about Alec Burks and Bojan Bogdanovic, but I'll be surprised to see him move unless they just get a major offer. But we'll talk about all that with Keith next week. So it should be a fun one.
Yeah, and again, if you have any questions, at Motor City Hoops for me on Twitter, at Omari Sankofa on Twitter for Omari, in the comments, on Freep comments, anything like that, any questions, cap-related stuff like that for Keith next week. And then the big one, Omari, we're already 50 episodes into this thing, the Pistons Pulse. It seemed like we just put it together. We just met out in Vegas. It's only been like 18 months, not even been 18 months, maybe 18 months since we met in person. But we're going to do a live recording of episode 50 here in a couple weeks on the Detroit Free Press YouTube channel. We don't have a time outline just yet. Omari's still figuring out his travel schedule, so we'll work all that. We know it's NFL championship weekend, but come join us for an hour. Put the NFL games on the TV in the background. Live recording. We'll take your questions live. You can type them into YouTube. We'll put them up on the screen. It's going to be a lot of fun, and we're very excited to do this for our 50th episode.
It's something we've talked about doing for a long time. It's something that you all have told us that you wanted, so to be able to do that 2 weeks from today should be a lot of fun. Ideally, we will probably do it sooner in the day rather than later, just to sort of get ahead of those games. And it's a Sunday, so some of you may go to church, so we just have to figure out the best time. But regardless, it'll be another fun episode, and very excited to close January with 2 back-to-back pretty fun episodes.
Absolutely. And of course, we'll still release that on Tuesday and put it out on all the podcasts and all that. We just thought it'd be a fun little twist there to do a live recording. But that's all the announcements. That's all the ratings and reviews this week. We appreciate those. Again, keep dropping those. Keep helping us grow and expand and reach as many Pistons fans out there as possible. But we had some games this week, Omari, and we had one on Sunday. We're recording this Sunday evening after the Knicks game, a 104-117 loss. Let's just jump into that one first. What were your takeaways from the game on Sunday? It started out ugly. I think the Pistons got down by 17 in the first quarter. They fought back. They ended up making a bunch of threes. I missed a little bit of this game. We had practice today. We're setting up for our high school league tournament. But what were your takeaways from the game on Sunday?
My takeaways on Sunday were pretty similar to my takeaways on Friday with that loss against the Pelicans, honestly, which is if the Pistons had more than one healthy big man, they probably would have had a chance to win. It's tough to I think Friday they only had Nerlens Noel, and that was his third straight start. And then on Sunday, Noel sits with knee soreness, and Isaiah Stewart comes back from his absence with left shoulder soreness, but just sort of musical chairs there. Bagley still out till after the All-Star break. And Jalen Duren sitting out as well, with his right ankle soreness, and he's missed their last 5 games. So just not a great week for Detroit's big man rotation, obviously. But the main thing with the Knicks is just, for some reason, they're just a really bad matchup for the Pistons, even beyond Detroit's depth issues up front. Julius Randle going off for 42 points after he scored 36 on his birthday back in November. I think he likes coming to Detroit a lot just because it keeps going off against them. Seems like Mitchell Robinson always has a big game against them. And of course, with only one healthy center, you'd expect both of those guys to go off. So to me, just the main issue with the Pistons right now is just getting more bodies up front and getting some more size, because that's going to hurt them every single time. But with all that said, yes, they lost all 5 games, including that preseason game to the Knicks this season. But this game was the most competitive of the 5, so maybe there are some brownie points there. And I do think if they had either Nerlens or Duren or just Bagley, somebody else who could offer some deterrence against New York's front court, it probably would have been a much closer margin, if not a win, because they trailed by 20, but they really did rally back, and it was a pretty competitive game down the stretch.
So Nerlens was out, because that was something I missed on the broadcast. For some reason, I had to watch the Knicks broadcast, and they weren't sure. I must have missed it on Twitter, but I was kind of surprised. I was hoping that Nerlens and Stu would start together, because I feel like Stu, I haven't loved that he's had to play so much 5 recently, Omari. I don't know how you feel about this, but I feel like he's gotten away from being able to play the 4 because of these injuries as well. And so I was surprised that Nerlens didn't start and then didn't play. I didn't realize that he actually wasn't available for this one.
Yeah, we actually didn't either. The Pistons never officially ruled him out, and maybe there was something after the 5:30 injury report I didn't actually check after. Dwayne did say after the game that he was a last-minute scratch with the knee soreness, so sometime in between Dwayne's pregame, which is always an hour 45 for home games before the game, the actual start of the game, Nerlens was ruled out. So that was a bit of a surprise. And, for folks who are just waiting for him to come off the bench, that's why you didn't see him come off of the bench. But the injuries have ruined one. Well, I won't say ruined. It has delayed the Pistons process just for seeing Jalen Duren and Isaiah Stewart play together. Because, of course, I think Bagley missed their first 13 games or something like that with the MCL sprain, and then he's been out with those broken fingers, and then Duren's missed time. And it just seems like there's been a revolving door for injuries in their front court. And ideally, not only just Isaiah and Duren being available, obviously, but one other big as well, just so that you can have an actual rotation and you don't have to stagger those 2 guys. So we did see a good stretch from them in December, but now it's going to have to be on hold really until All-Star weekend when Bagley comes back, as far as getting back to that 2-big rotation the way that Dwayne Casey wants to do it.
And it has opened the door for another player, Hamidou Diallo, who we will talk about later, and I'm very excited. I don't want to get into it right now, Omari. Let's save it for later, but I want to get your thoughts on the Hami playing the 4, Hami playing the 5 minutes, and all of that. But we will talk about that later. You made me think that, there's a lot of guys having to play out of role right now because of this, even Jaden Ivey to an extent. And so we aren't maybe getting the best versions or the best developmental pass for some of these guys because of those injuries. But yeah, Mitchell Robinson dominated this game. He only had, Omari, 4 points. He had 12 rebounds. He had 2 steals, 3 blocks. He set the tone right from the beginning of the game that the paint was his and the Pistons were probably better off not attacking. And I don't know if this was the most threes the Pistons have shot this year in a game. They shot it well. They were 41%, 18 of 44, but over half of their attempts ended up being from behind the 3-point line. And I think a lot of that had to do with Mitchell Robinson manning the paint. And then you could just see New York was really able to get into the lane and score at will about as much as they wanted as well. And as you mentioned, Julius Randle just seems to love to play the Detroit Pistons right now.
He absolutely does. And you did see the team kind of pivot away from attacking the rim in the first quarter because Mitchell Robinson did have 3 blocks in the first quarter and really sort of impose himself defensively in the opening minutes of the game, which honestly ended up working out pretty well for the Pistons because they shot the 3-ball pretty well, and that kind of got them back into the game. They ended the second quarter with a 15-4 run, and Alec Burks hit a couple of threes in the final period and ended up getting back within 7. They had a 9-1 run. I think Burks hit 2 threes in that stretch that got them back within 7 midway through the fourth quarter. And then, of course, Randle and Brunson just kind of closed the game out. Brunson had a good game as well. He didn't score 42. I think he had 27, but still shot the ball pretty efficiently. But again, I just really feel like if the Pistons were a little bit healthier, this either would have gone down to the wire or really could have been a win for them because they shot the ball well. They got good performances from Sadiq Bey. I think he had 5 threes.
5 of 10.
Isaiah Stewart had 2 early fouls, too, and I think that kind of helped Randle get going early. Not that it mattered because Randle was hitting a lot of contested jumpers, so maybe not. But overall, despite the loss, I thought that was probably pretty close to the best case scenario for the Pistons just from the competition standpoint. Because on paper, New York absolutely should have won that game. That would have been a huge upset if the Pistons were able to win that.
That game reminded me of the first Sixers game, not the one that ended up a 30-point blowout, but the one before that, the first of the back-to-back against the Sixers, in that I watched that game and I'm like, the Sixers should be beating the Pistons by so much more than they are right now. And that's kind of how I felt about the Knicks today, was they should have been beating the Pistons. They're definitely better than the Pistons. And it kind of went back to the beginning of the season when we talked about the Pistons not really being a play-in team, because you look at a team like the Knicks, who actually have probably exceeded expectations of a lot of people right now, but you looked at the Knicks roster and you're like, that's a better roster than the Pistons, and people are saying they may not even make the play-in game. Other notable Livers was 3 of 8 in this game. Knox was 3 of 4. He had 16 in a return to New York, and Alex Burks was 4 of 6. Let's transition to the Pelicans game because it was very similar in the sense that the Pistons were competitive. They only lost by 6, had a really nice fourth quarter stretch. They found a little group of 5 that worked together well and really made a run there in the fourth. But at the end of the day, they couldn't stop Jonas Valanciunas. They just had no matchup. There were some guys that came in and filled admirably, but at the end of the day, he had 33 points and just dominated the game.
He had 33 and 16 for Jonas, and I think he shot 80% from the floor. He had 33 on 15 shots. And again, like I said earlier, just another game where if you had anybody that could slow him down, and really I think that would have been a good game for Duren, just 2 huge bodies in the post, because Nerlens wasn't able to do a whole lot that game. He was great against Minnesota the game before that previous Wednesday, but just wasn't able to do much against Jonas. Good performances in that game, but you saw the writing on the wall early when Jonas got going early, and Nerlens picked up. He got into foul trouble, and at that point, it's like, okay, they could just feed Jonas all night and get him to 40 if they wanted to, and he ended up with 33. But another good competitive game. I know that there was a lot of concern about the Pistons' compete level that previous week. That bad loss to Philly, and there were just some concerning performances. But I thought last week, especially those last 2 games, and then you couple that with the win against Minnesota, the compete level got back up. I really think some of what the team is dealing with right now is just tired legs. They've played the most games in the NBA, 47. A lot of teams haven't even played 44 yet. If you look at the standings, there are teams that played 42. And I know that sounds like an excuse, but that is a lot of basketball. They already played 10 under 13 back-to-back. So I think that's part of it, just the injuries and just the amount of basketball they've played. We've just kind of seen them drop off the face of the earth a few games. But they got back to it this past week. I really do think if they had more healthy bodies up front, you're looking at a potential 2-2 week, 2-3, 3-2, somewhere in that range. Yeah, Pelicans, no Zion, no Brandon Ingram. That on paper seemed like a game they probably could have stole, but when you can't match up against Jonas and you're still one of the best post bigs in the NBA, I think that kind of goes the way you expect.
Well, and the problem with that game was they didn't shoot the ball well, Omari. So it's if you take the Knicks game shooting performance and do it in the Pelicans game, they probably score 120, 125 points and they win that game. But instead, Detroit goes 7 of 30 from the 3-point line. Killian was 3 of 3. So the rest of the team went 4 of 26 from the 3-point line in that game. Hami with an incredible performance. Again, we'll talk about him later. But if they shoot the ball well, they probably win that game. And I realized it was a depleted Pelicans team, but still, like, it's just they can't do, doesn't seem like they can do all of everything well in the same game. It's like if they do halfway decent with their energy, then the shot making isn't there. If the shot making is there, maybe the defense isn't there. If the defense is there, the defensive rebounding isn't there. Like, they just can't put it all together. And I want to say that maybe those tired legs will be rested when we see them a week from now. You know, they're off for 3 days. They play the Bulls in Paris. Then they're off for another 3 days. But I can't imagine that travel is going to be easy either. So even though they only have one game in the next week, I don't know that that helps a whole lot because they're going to be flying to France and back. So I think it'll be really interesting to see what we get in that game on Thursday. I know everybody's excited. That has to be really, really cool for Killian. Unfortunately, you do not get to go. I'm sorry, my friend. I'm sure you were looking forward to that. But I'm interested to see how they look coming back from that as well, because I tend to agree with you. We'll talk about Jaden Ivey a little bit later as well. I feel like the last 3 games we've seen a better demeanor from Jaden Ivey just in terms of his energy. He seems like he's having fun. He's smiling. And I wonder if the NBA season has started to wear on these young guys a little bit. We talked about this when we recorded in the Denver hotel here right before Thanksgiving. It seems like this can really start to drag, especially this time of year.
Yeah, I remember I did that story in Rashard Lewis. I think it was back in November or maybe the beginning of December. And we talked about Jalen Duren a lot because he's worked with him a lot. And Rashard came in right out of high school. Duren, of course, was 18 years old to start the season. So they've worked a lot with each other. And I just remember Rashard saying by the time January comes, like, if he's not using a half sub, now he's going to feel it, right? Now he's just the last 5 games of right ankle soreness. So there's a lot that goes into the rookie season as far as just learning the preparation and, keeping your body fresh. Like, I'm sure Jaden's probably felt just the grind of the season. And he's been asked to do a lot too, just from a playmaking standpoint. And I think his role's probably been more involved than anybody could have guessed before the season with Cade out. So, it's tough for those guys to adapt to playing 82 games. You're playing 3-4 games a week. And even by normal NBA standards, the first half of this season has been pretty jam-packed where they've already played 47 games. That's most of the rest of the NBA is just now crossing the halfway point. So it'll definitely be good for them to get some time off. I'm not sure how much time off to actually have, just given that I think it's a 7-hour flight to France, and then it's a 6-hour time difference. So probably need a day or two to adjust and whatnot. But overall, just to have a week of mostly practice and, they'll have sightseeing. And I'll actually have a story coming out. We're recording this Sunday night, but Monday about all the stuff going into their Paris trip. And sounds pretty cool. Hopefully next time they go internationally, I'll be able to go. This week will be certainly an unexpectedly chill week, compared to the usual grind of covering the NBA. But for the Pistons, just a well-needed week of some relaxation, some rest, some sightseeing, obviously a basketball game on Thursday. Then they'll be right back here on Monday next week to play the Milwaukee Bucks, because that's a great team to play.
Coming off that trip.
Coming off of that trip. So
you just mentioned Cade Cunningham. We finally got a glimpse of Cade since the surgery. Have you been able to watch any interactions on the bench from Cade with his teammates? Any change? I talked about the change in Jaden Ivey. Obviously, it was the game before Cade returned, but I feel like Cade is one of those guys that brings positivity. He brings energy. People gravitate to him. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a change in just the energy level around the team with Cade back on the bench. Have you been able to sense that at all, just pregame, locker room, during the game on the bench?
A little bit. Like, I have so much going on during games, it's hard to kind of just see what's happening on the bench a lot. But just for what I've seen, like, he's been his usual demeanor, like talking to guys, engaged in the game and whatnot. A tough situation for him not being able to play, obviously. But Dwayne also mentioned that he's been around the team, right? He's been at practices. He's been, just a lot of spots behind the scenes that we as media usually can't see just because we don't watch practices. We only see the portion after when they're doing one-on-one work in. But by all accounts, he's been around, he's been engaged, he's been the same usual Cade. And, we just know how important he is to this team, not just as a player, but as a person, a leader as well. So, I'm sure that's probably lifted some spirits having him back. And He's been his usual self as far as we could tell.
Let's touch on the Timberwolves game just real quick, because I felt like it was a big organizational win coming off the Spurs loss, which wasn't great, then back-to-back losses to the Sixers, the second one of which was a 31-point loss where they gave up 147 points. And we're going to talk about the defense as a whole in the next segment, Omari. But I thought that win over Minnesota, another one where Minnesota jumped out to an early lead, like the earlier win in the season for the Pistons. Detroit battles back, wins that game by 17, really shot the ball well in this game. A 31-point performance from Saddiq Bey, 27 from Boyan. The backcourt of Hayes and Ivy combined for 36 points, 17 assists. I thought it might have been Jaden Ivey's all-around best game of his young career. Guess it's not a young season anymore. What did you think about that win against Minnesota, just in terms of the morale of the team?
Yeah, just very, very energetic win. I thought it was one of Detroit's just best executed games from start to finish. They shoot 60% overall. They shot 53.1% from three to hit 17 of their 32 attempts. Bey had a season high 31 points. That was one of his best performances. Ivy, Killian, Hamid, all 18 points. That was another great Hamid performance. And we're going to talk about him, but his energy has just been really fantastic off the bench. And I not only thought that was one of Ivy's best games just as an overall scorer and playmaker, but I thought that was probably the best game that he and Killian Hayes played together, which I feel like Ivy has not played off of Killian as well as he played off of Cade at the beginning of the season. And whether that's just because of the relative lack of gravity Killian has compared to Cade or what it is, I think it's probably worth a deeper dive at some point. But to get 2 wins over Minnesota, a team very much to play and hunt, even though they probably haven't lived up to expectations, or if you hated the Gobert trade, maybe this is exactly what you expected. But regardless, even without Karl Anthony Towns, Minnesota should have won that game. They just have a very clear talent advantage. You have Defensive Player of the Year. D'Angelo Russell, I know he's been in trade rumors, but he's still a pretty skilled scorer. Anthony Edwards, he actually missed a good bit of that game with, I think, some hip soreness, but he did come back. Pistons really handled them from, I thought, not from start to finish, but really in the second half, I thought they dominated, and that's what you want to see, especially coming on the second half of a back-to-back after getting smacked in Philly the night prior. I thought that was a really good bounce-back game, one of their best performances this year.
So we've been getting a lot of feedback, Omari, about us not addressing the defensive woes of the Detroit Pistons. So we are going to take a deep dive. If you're into stats and metrics, and we'll try to give some answers and some whys and break it all down. But I went and did as much deep dive research as I could. We'll talk about communication, rotations, mismatches, defensive rebounding, all of this stuff in the next segment. But we're going to take a real quick break right here and then dive into the Detroit Pistons defensive issues.
I'm Alyssa Robinson for the Detroit Free Press. When you wake up every morning, what's the first thing you do? Check your email? Me too. And when you sign up for our daily briefing newsletter, you'll get all the latest news sent directly to your inbox so you can wake up and be ready for the day. We also have newsletters about COVID-19 in Michigan, the latest entertainment headlines, as well as Woodward 248, a newsletter specifically for people living and working in Southeast Oakland County. And don't forget about automotive headlines and all the latest news from our Michigan sports teams. We have a newsletter for every personality and preference. Just head to freep.com/newsletters to sign up for any one of these great options and more.
All right, we're back, and we are going to dive into the defense, which I think is likely the biggest reason why the Pistons have one of the worst records. They haven't been amazing offensively, but you look at the score sheet a lot of nights, they've scored enough to win. So their issue is just their lack of ability to stop people. And I would say it's pretty, I think the reason why is pretty clear. Like, people can point to whatever, but at the end of the day, this team has two defenders that I would say are good, and Killian Hayes and Isaiah Stewart. I think Isaiah Livers is pretty good too as a team defender, and he's missed about half of the season so far. So, that obviously factors in. But we're going to get pretty in-depth into this, but I think you'll probably agree that it really just starts with just the lack of productive defenders on the roster to begin with. It's really hard to coach a team that just doesn't have the personnel to stop people. And it's not like college, right, where you can press and do all these things that slow teams down. In the NBA, it's really hard if you don't have the personnel.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't think they have a lot of great on-ball point of attack defenders on the perimeter. Even in the paint right now, we saw how big of a difference Nerlens Noel made in his minutes and how much better the defense could look at times just because he's better playing drop coverage, even though he can't hold his ground physically because he's so skinny. But yeah, and then I don't think this team has a lot of great team defenders either, and we'll get into that when we're talking about rotations and some of that stuff. But let me throw out some of the numbers, Omari, and I'll stop. I'm not going to give everything right off the bat because I have like a whole page of it. And I do want to mention they're 18th in the NBA in scoring, Omari. So while there's things to nitpick about the offense, for being one of the worst teams in the league, they're actually right below middle of the pack in offensive output, and that's without their best player in Cade Cunningham. So I think you could say and chalk up the offensive production this year being a pretty big win. I don't know how you feel about that, and we'll get into the defense. Like I promise the rest of this segment will be on defense, but I feel like, that's something you can feel decent about, no?
That has been a win for this team to be within the proximity of average after very much not being that for a while, and a lot of that can be traced back to just having Bojan Bogdanovic, who's been one of the NBA's better scorers, and Alec Burks, too, who's been one of the NBA's best bench scorers. Those guys are both players who can generate their own shots. To have two players who can do that is a big win for this team. And if Cade run this team, we talk about a team that's potentially above average, I think, just given how young this team is, and Sadiq's still shooting like 33% from three, so he's had a down year. And, going into the season, we saw him as a potential third option overall, and that hasn't happened. So it really just speaks to – and the injuries, too. I mean, Bagley's missed a lot of time, and he's obviously – a lot of his value comes when he does offensively. So to have a team overall that I think has scored enough most nights to at least be in the game has been a pretty measurable step forward. Maybe we could have an offense episode later on in the season once people are less upset about the defense. But it is worth shouting out. They have been pretty decent offensively compared to last season and the year before.
Okay, let's dive into the defense. So here's some numbers. We'll start with this. We'll stop after I give out so many, and we'll talk about it, and then we'll go to the next thing. They're giving up almost 120 points per game, good for 29th in the NBA. They give up 30.1 points in the first quarter, 29.6 in the second, 31.2 in the third, and 28.1 in the fourth. That's bottom 5 in the NBA in every single quarter. So they're one of the worst defensive teams in the league every single quarter. And just for like some comparison, the Cavs are the best defensive team in the league at 107 points per game, 12 points difference there. The median number in the NBA is 113. So there's a 6-point difference between the median number in the NBA and where the Pistons are at. That's pretty significant. 6 points is pretty significant when you're talking this big of a sample size. So that's just the overall. We'll get into the individual stats there, but what sticks out to you there, Omari? I'll go first. For me, it's that like there's not even a good quarter in there, and the third quarter is the worst, which is kind of frustrating that maybe there's not even anything that is able to make changes at halftime where they come out and they're able to, maybe learn from what happened in the first half and get better there to start the third quarter. I think the fourth quarter only goes down because games tend to slow down in the fourth in general.
Maybe it's not a lack of focus. Like it could be a lack of focus coming out of halftime, but I also just think the Pistons are generally playing better teams every night. You're playing teams with at least one all-star, like a lot of proven scorers, and just those teams tend to come out of halftime and they're going to attack, right? Like especially if you have less than a 10-point lead, you're going to come out and make a point to try to put the Pistons away. Something I've talked about before, but just generally when you're not a good team and when you're the Pistons and you only have maybe 2.5 good defenders, it's very hard to dictate what the other team does, right? So if you are, like, let's pick a team that's not necessarily a good team, but still have some really good scores in the Chicago Bulls. If you're the Chicago Bulls, you have Zach LaVine, you have DeMar DeRozan, you have Vucevic, who are 3 of the NBA's better offensive players. You might be a good team overall, but you still have 3 guys that can get a bucket, right? And if they're going to come out and they want to punch the Pistons in the mouth, and you're the Pistons, what are you going to do? You're just going to get punched in the mouth. Like, what else can you do? You're just going to get punched. Like, that's like, you're not going to stop those guys. So I think a lot of that just, of course, if you're the Pistons, you want to come out with, to use one of Dwayne Casey's words, the disposition to make a point to slow every team down. And maybe you can do that in spurts, but in the end, it's just to be a lack of ability and just a lack of personnel for the Pistons to defend a lot of those guys. And I think at the end of the day, if you're playing a better team, that team's going to dictate the flow of the game. And if you're the Pistons, you just can't do much about it.
I think that's where some of my frustration lies with the defense, Omari, is I would like to at least see some more spurts, like a quarter here and there where they hold them to 25. I think that actually happened in the Knicks game today where they held them to 23 in the second quarter or something like that. I would love to see more and more of that. So let's go to the next. They're 28th in block shots. They're actually middle of the pack in steals, like 15, 16, something like that. 26 in non-block shot 2-point percentage. So they're not really great defending the rim right now. So my question here is, what would your thoughts be about them being more aggressive defensively, turning some of these guys loose to go block more shots, turning some of these guys loose to go be more aggressive in the gap and passing lanes, trying to get steals? If you're not going to be that good in the half court, just shutting guys down, maybe you get aggressive, Omari, and try to speed them up, force some turnovers, get some steals, get some runs outs, and transition that way. I don't know. I'm not saying that I think that's what they should do, and I don't know that that's the best long-term play. But what are your thoughts? Is that maybe something they could do? Because to me, like, this aggressive mentality really isn't what the Detroit coaching staff is really looking for.
I think one thing that limits that is that the Pistons are a young team. So you kind of have to find that balance between aggression, but also discipline. Because, this team does lead the NBA in fouls. So, if you tell them to turn loose, right? Like if you tell Jalen Duren, hey, just try to swat everything. And he's already a 19-year-old rookie trying to learn the NBA pace and how to deter opposing players from getting to the rim, which, takes time to learn. And then you tell him, hey, just go out and swat everything. How many of those instances end up with him committing 2-3 fouls in the first quarter or ending up in foul trouble when you already know Bagley's out for a while? And just that big man rotation hasn't really necessarily been healthy enough to really allow your bigs to play as aggressively as you may like them to. And then, of course, your guards. I mean, you look at the guards and the wings, you have Killian, but you don't even have neutral defenders. You have like a lot of outright bad defenders. So to me, that becomes a question of how much of that aggression can lead to, steals and turnovers, and you're actually creating things that can get you going on offense. And how much of that is just you're going to foul the other team, going to hack them where you already are. You're already leading the NBA in that area. And your defense just becomes even more chaotic. So, the bottom line is just, I think when you have a team that doesn't have the personnel to do it, you're just picking them on a lot of bad options. I mean, there's always a debate about should they switch more, should they switch less, yada, yada. To me, no matter what you do, you either have the execution or you don't. And to me, I just don't know if they have the execution to do that. So dial it back, be more aggressive. Either way, they got to get those fouls down to really do anything better than they are now.
And we're going to talk about the switch, drop coverage stuff, and how when they're playing in drop, the communication, the rotations, all of that. But I think that would be my worry is you just tell these guys to be more aggressive. Well, Jaden Ivey already has a ton of bad habits defensively, and really probably all you're going to do is encourage him to have more. Hamidou Diallo, who, again, as we've mentioned him multiple times, and we will talk specifically very positively about Hami in just a little bit, but has some bad habits defensively, especially off the ball. You would just encourage more, and you mentioned Jalen Duren. So I don't know that I subscribe to that. I do like whenever they tend to be a little more aggressive with traps and some stuff like that. They did it. They surprised the Knicks, I believe, is the end of the second quarter on Sunday. They actually got a steal out of it. So some of those, like trapping some ball screens here and there and some different things like that. But overall, I think just turning them loose to block shots and those things, I don't know that I think I would tend to lean towards agreeing with the coaching staff. Just like, let's teach them the right way, hopefully, to play the game, even if they're not very good at it right now, and that'll be better long term. And then the fouls are an issue, Omari. I think that's a very telling stat to this team. Just doesn't have great point of attack defenders. When you're not a good defender, you know what you do? You either give up a blow by or you foul because you're constantly caught out of position or in a mismatch situation where you can't hold up one-on-one.
And another thing about that as well is defense takes time to teach. And I also think that is something that for a lot of guys is just innate. You always have examples of players who have improved defensively over the years, but typically players that come in with strong defensive reputations from college tend to be good defenders in the NBA, and players that don't have it in college a lot of times just don't become that in the NBA. And you could coach guys, you can see improvement on that end, but it takes time. It takes time. And I think over the course of a season, it is really hard to just actually teach, right? Like there's a lot of game preparation, there's a lot of individual skill work, but I think defense is something that you really try to crystallize in training camp and just over the offseason in general. And once you come to the season, you're already bad. It's just hard to kind of get everybody on the same page. So I think probably a debate for the coaching staff now is how much can you reasonably tweak without breaking what you already have and getting guys more discombobulated than they already are. Killian, I think, is a good point of attack defender. I think Ivy has the tools to be. I think Hami has the tools to be. So you have players that have the tools to do these things. With another issue altogether to get them to do it with consistency. And that's, to me, just a season-long process, an off-season process. And it's just something that's very, very hard to turn around in the midst of a season.
So here's a stat that was interesting to me. They're 28th in opponents' points in the paint. They're actually 27th before the two big lineups started on whatever the date was. I had it whenever I went and found the stats. To me, this is a little discouraging, but I think if you look a little deeper, it may not be about the bigs. And I want to see what your thoughts are. But also this, they're bottom 5 in field goal attempts, field goal made, and field goal percentage of their opponent's attempts within 6 feet. So that's a long way of saying they're not very good protecting the paint 5-6 feet and in. Do you think that has more to do with the bigs or what we're talking about with not having very good point of attack defenders? Because I tend to think, like, yeah, would it be better if Isaiah Stewart was a little bit better of a rim protector? Sure. Would we like to see Jalen Duren average more blocks? Sure. But I think a lot of it has to do with the wings and the guards not being able to keep guys out of the lane in general.
I agree with that. I think a lot of it starts on the perimeter. And I think there's only a handful of bigs who you can really do the strategy of just funneling guys into the paint and just trusting your big to kind of take care of it. Like, you can do that with Rudy Gobert.
Exactly.
Even Utah has been hurt over the or was hurt over the years with not having the wing defenders to prevent them from getting to the rim to begin with. Because now Rudy's being stretched a million different directions, and now guys are rotating, and things just sort of collapse. So I think the best defense is making life as easy for your big as possible, even if you do have one of the NBA's better bigs, or you just stack bigs up. Like, Cleveland is a great defensive team, but you have Jared Allen and you have Evan Mobley. So, I think that gives you a lot more room for error when you have one of the best pure rim protectors in Allen, and then a guy in Mobley who's young, but he was a great defender in college, and he's just a big who can really move in space. He's long. He can just create a lot of havoc, which the Pistons don't have. Of course, also you're starting Isaiah Stewart and Jalen Duren for much of the season, and I think Isaiah is learning how to defend in space more than he had previously. And Duren's a rookie rim protector, so he's going to have great moments, but he's also going to get confused a lot and just be scrambling and trying to figure things out. So, the best thing for the Pistons, I think, if they had, like, Killian's been good, but if you had somebody between the heights of 6'6" and 6'9" specifically who could contain players, and you're just not having a layup line to the rim like the Pistons have a lot of nights, that would go a long way. Like, if this team had Jeremy Grant, and I'm not saying they should have kept Jeremy. I'm saying, like,
this
Jeremy
one,
Grant,
that is getting aggregated on Wednesday.
Just using him as an example because he's been really good with Portland this season. Somebody like that, I think, would help a lot. But Jeremy, even when he was in Detroit, I think he's been better defensively this season than he was last year or the year before, because Pistons just needed Jeremy to do too much on both ends of the floor. So a lot of that is role as well. Like, I don't know if you put Jeremy Grant on this team right now that he would fix every issue, but they just need more players like that, big, long range of defenders who can be a deterrent and keep guys out of the paint to begin with.
I think that's a good point. We talk about a lot that the offensive roles for these guys are above what they should be. I'm very critical of Bojan Bogdanovic's defense, very critical. And it's probably unfair because he's playing an offensive role that he probably shouldn't be, right? Like, at his age, he's been great, don't get me wrong, but he probably shouldn't be like the number one option, which essentially he has been with Detroit. Jaden Ivey's probably in a bigger role offensively than what he should be. Now, I'm not excusing Jaden Ivey's defense. I've said he hasn't just been bad for an NBA player. He's been bad even for NBA rookie defenders. I think he should be better than what he is even right now, but there is a factor of that. And I do want to mention, I know people are going to say, well, Walker Kessler is blocking all sorts of shots for the Jazz. I just want everybody to know Walker Kessler was a historic shot blocker in college. And that's not hyperbole, like legit historic block percentage in college, like of all time with what he did last year at Auburn. So like even though Jalen Duren blocked shots at Memphis, it wasn't like what Walker Kessler was doing at Auburn. I think my biggest thing, Omari, is the communication with this team. And I know it sounds easy and to be like, yeah, just talk more, but I feel like there's miscommunication all the time. Constantly, every game, there's a transition where they don't get matched up. And there's even more communication required when you're playing drop coverage and not switching everything. And then there comes rotations behind those things. So while I like that this team isn't switching everything, and I also want the listeners to know, even when you see the Pistons switch sometimes, that wasn't the original scheme. Sometimes they're in drop coverage. The guard isn't able to navigate the screen, and then eventually they have to switch because he's not going to get back. So not every time they switch was that the called coverage. But I just don't think they've been very good, like with their communication. Even when they get a good rotation, then they don't close out very well. To me, that's just, as you've said, it's just kind of a mess everywhere. I wish there was at least a couple areas where they could hang their hats and we could be like, man, at least they're doing this pretty well.
No doubt. And that's one thing I think that Isaiah Livers will help with, because he is a good communicator and a good organizer. And you see him point guys into position, and guys going to tend to check in on him, like, what should we do, yada, yada. So I do think that Isaiah Livers being back will help a little bit. But I think the lack of communication and the lack of organization is a young team symptom. Your starting lineup is consisting of two rookies. Killian Hayes is still in year 3. And I think Killian has become a lot more vocal this year, but this is a newer role for him. He's found his confidence, and that's something he can grow into, right? Being organized, not just on offense, but on defense. That's a growth point for him. Same for Isaiah. He's grown a lot this year as a leader, and they're trying to fill that void, I think, left by Cade. But young team symptom. A lot of young teams don't communicate. Some veteran teams don't communicate on defense very well, but that's,
I was just saying, I don't think Bojan's very good off the ball, Omari. Like that's one of my biggest things with him. It's one thing to ask 33-year-old Bojan Bogdanovic to guard Jason Tatum. Like, I mean, that's unfair. It's another thing where Bojan seems to get lost off the ball, doesn't make a rotation, or doesn't communicate.
And that is a skill. And you mentioned Bojan's relaxed to do a lot on offense, and I think that's probably sapped a lot of his energy on defense. Like, I know just from talking to some like Jazz writers that he did have a pretty good playoff run defensively, with Utah last year. Pistons aren't going to the playoffs, so maybe that's part of it as well, right? Like a Bojan, like, not that Bojan's ever been like an all-world defender, but like his best defensive efforts every night will take away from offense, and how much of a difference, like, after a certain point, it's like you just need more defenders across the board, right? Yeah, I mean, this team on paper should be a little bit better because you have good athletes, but I think it's just getting them organized and getting them to play protective basketball. And coming into the season, we knew Hamid had deficiencies on defense. We knew Bagley had deficiencies. We knew Sadiq had deficiencies. So a lot of this is not surprising. It's just more so, I think, wanting to see that week to week and month to month growth, and that hasn't necessarily been there either. So still a few months left for the season ends, but thus far it's been pretty consistent as far as their issues all season. We haven't really seen them trend into the right direction yet.
And you know who's a good communicator defensively, even though I haven't loved his point of attack so far in his career, is Cade Cunningham. Like, going back to his very first summer league game, I remember people highlighting, because you could hear him talking as the low man in his very first summer league game. And, that you could hear him talk, I'm low, I'm low, I'm low. And that's just who Cade is. And so I'm sure they're missing some of that as well. And to me, that's where I would like to see the growth. So I want you to give one area you'd like to see grow here in the next couple months, and then we'll have to go to break. But for me, it's that communication. I would just like to see some better execution in those areas. Even if they don't execute the closeout, I still appreciate where they double the post, rotate out, X out on the backside, and they get to the right spots, even if then Sadiq Bey gets blown by. I want to see them execute a drop coverage, tag the low man, communicate the X out, all of those things. Like, those are the things that I don't think they're doing very well right now, but I do think that they could improve. And it's not like point of attack defense. It's not asking Sadiq Bey to hold up against Julius Randle in the post. It's not asking, like I said, Kevin Knox to guard Jason Tatum on the wing. It's more of just like that team defense stuff that I think I expected this team to be a little bit better at. And maybe I overestimated the feel and the communication and maybe even just the chemistry of this team on that end of the floor.
I agree with all of that, but I also want to see Jaden Ivey really make defense his charge. And I think for Ivey, if he maybe thought 20% less about what I'm doing on offense and 20% more about locking down my man on defense and really being that point of attack guy, which he has all the tools to do. Like, he's athletic, he moves very fast, he has a long wingspan, he's got good size at 6'4". He has all the physical tools to do it. For him, it is just, he has to make that a priority. And I think you see him make a lot of mental mistakes that you expect from a rookie. But I do think that he can improve a lot and be better than he has been. He has spurts of really good defense in college. And every now and then we just see him make plays that other guys can't make. I mean, he's a great athlete. He can get transition blocks. He can recover really quickly. He's got gifts that other guys don't have. So if he makes defense his charge, I think that could help at least just give you another perimeter guy who's not funneling players to the rim, essentially, because he does get blown by a lot.
He does. We're going to talk about Jaden Ivey here in the final segment. We're going to lead off with Sadiq Bey, and we'll also talk some, as promised, Hamidou Diallo.
All right. Hey, Carlos, just a quick idea. How about if I say, hey, this is Sean Windsor, and you say, hey, this is Carlos Smaros, and I'll go, and then we'll go back. You want to try that?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, you ready?
Yep.
Hey, this is Sean Windsor.
And this is Carlos Benares.
And we are the team behind Free Press Sports with Carlos and Sean, where we are going to talk about, you guessed it, sports, but lots of other stuff. Like what, Carlos?
Oh, we're going to talk about your favorite subject, Sean, food. Probably more food. Arts, culture, sports, TV, movies, you name it. If it's happened in Detroit, we're going to talk about it.
And sometimes we're going to have guests in who obviously know a lot more than we do about just about everything. But we're going to have some Free Press journalists to talk about big stories, folks from the sports world. We're going to be out every Thursday. You can find this podcast wherever you find your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts. We hope you'll join us.
All right, we're back, and we're going to lead off with the player we closed the last segment with, Jaden Ivey. It's been a pretty up and down season for him, and I think some of that's expected. Just like you're a rookie guard, there's a learning curve, and we already knew that he was going to have some growth to do as a shooter and playmaker anyway. You know, with that said, it seems like he has not really strung together like a full week of good play really since those initial first weeks of the season. It's been very seesawy from game to game. And to me, it's just him processing the NBA in real time, learning what he can and can't get away with. But like I think it's pretty clear that Cade's injury has hurt him. You compare his Cade splits with his post-Cade splits, and there's a very clear difference in his efficiency. And we just haven't been able to see him string together 4 or 5 good games in a row. Like he is high, he's low, and I think he's probably hit some of that rookie wall as well.
Yeah, he has, but like, I'm still not disappointed with what we're seeing from him offensively, Omari. Like, we've talked about the defense. That's obviously a big concern. But offensively, he's still averaging 15 points, 4.2 assists, 4.1 rebounds on 41, 33, 72. Let me ask you this. Are you happy with Jaden Ivey shooting 33% from three in his rookie season? Because I am. Like, that's not a bad metric compared to what I thought it might be.
No, that's actually been a huge plus. And I think it looks even better now. When you see that one of the other best shooters in the draft, I know this is your guy, I like him a lot too, Ben Bath, has actually kind of tailed off after a hot start.
Yep.
And him and Ivy are actually around the same 3-point percentage right now, which I would say I did not expect at any point this season. And Ivy's been fine as a shooter. He hasn't been amazing. He hasn't been terrible. He has been fine. I would say if I had to guess his percentage for this season, I would have guessed in like around like that 32, 33% range. Obviously, with a chance of that being a lot worse if his shot's just completely broken. But his shot's not broken. He shot it pretty well. I think I've actually, for me, more so just want to see him shoot a higher percentage overall, given that his best skill is getting downhill and he draws a lot of fouls. But I think he leaves points on the floor as far as just in the paint. But the shooting aspect's been fine. Like, again, I would say that's probably a pretty median outcome as far as the expected ranges for him this season from to be where he's at right now. So that's not been a problem at all for me.
Jaden Ivey can survive as a 33% three-point shooter, especially this is what he's doing as a rookie. If he bumps that a couple percentage, if he's a 35% three-point shooter on decent volume, like, are you kidding me? Like, with everything he had, that's as much as he needs to be successful as an NBA offensive player, with the flashes of everything else we've seen, the speed, the explosiveness, the willingness to pass at times. I know the process isn't always great. I think sometimes he predetermines like, hey, I need to go score on this one. But I put his numbers up against Cade Cunningham, Jalen Green, Tyrese Halliburton, Anthony Edwards, Darius Garland as rookies. And he's not leading the pack by any means, but like his numbers aren't embarrassing at all compared to Cade Cunningham's rookie season. His numbers aren't that, like, he averages less points than Jalen Green did as a rookie, but more assists and more rebounds. Even his field goal percentage is similar to Cade, Jalen Green, Anthony Edwards, and Darius Garland. The only one who was more efficient from the field was Tyrese Halliburton, but he only averaged 13 points a game. So, like, the reason I bring this up, Omari, is I feel like I've seen a lot of disappointment in Jaden Ivey's game recently, and it just doesn't make sense to me unless you're specifically talking about the defense. If you're overly worried about the defense, I guess I can't blame you, because maybe I am as a little as well. But even though it's been a little bit of a roller coaster from him offensively, he's a rookie. Like, you're going to get that. I just feel like we've seen all the positives that we could have hoped for and needed to see to still have the same belief in him that we had pre-draft.
And he hasn't been bad by any means. I think anytime you have a player like Jaden Ivey, who's as good of an athlete as he is, I think expectations will always be a little bit higher. And I think that Ivey's mistakes probably tend to be louder than the mistakes for a lot of players, where like whether it's the turnovers or defense or whatever else, maybe he's being held to a higher standard. But I think some of that, too, is just some of the inconsistency that he's had. I just checked this with Basketball Reference. Over his last 13 games, that's not including today's Knicks game, simply because Basketball Ref does an update to the next day. In his last 13 games, he is shooting 39% from three.
Yes.
But he's also shooting 38.7% from the floor.
Oh,
and I think that's
not good.
And I think that's where the disappointment comes from, because he should be much better from the field than that, considering that he is so good at getting downhill. So I think with Ivy, even if his counting stats are fine, right? Like 4 assists, more assists and turnovers, 15 points, like that's all fine. Probably about where you expect from three, if not a little bit better. But he is still leaving things on the table, and I think that's what creates some of that frustration. Like, again, like 39% from three, great. 37% from the floor, not great.
Not great.
And that's a 13-game span, so we're going back 3 or 4 weeks, where he's shooting below 40% from the field. So I think that's where it comes from, right? Not that he's necessarily playing bad, but that you see he could be so much better than he currently is. But again, like we knew he would have ups and downs coming into the year, and that it would probably take him a few seasons before he really ironed out a lot of the warts he has in his game right now. So it's just a difference between knowing that's going to be the case, but then actually watching it over the course of an 82-game season. I think that's where we're at right now, 47 games in.
I think for me, it's like I expected the three-point shooting to not be good at all, and it's been better than expected. And I was so worried about his mid-range game, and we've seen a little bit of that. I'm not saying it's been great. I know what the percentages are. I know it's not great, but he's at least taking and making some, which he very rarely did at Purdue, that I kind of remember that stuff. And I'm probably not docking him enough for all of the missed shots at the rim, which we did talk about last episode, right? That if he would just make the wide open layups, or what essentially are a wide open layup in the NBA, his shooting percentage would probably be in the mid 40s. Let's talk about Hamidou Diallo next, because we've kind of teased this, and I want to make sure we get to this. And if we have to move Sadiq Bey to another episode, we may just have to do that. But I want to make sure we get to Hami, because the other thing is, he flat out deserves some love, Omari. And I'll admit, like, if somebody has receipts somewhere, I don't know how it works. Give me mine or whatever, or I'll give you your, however it works. But I was a Hami fan when they traded for him. I fell a little bit out of that coming into the season. Man, he's played really well, Omari. I don't know what his role is longer term. I want to talk about that in a second. But the last 10 games, as you mentioned before night, because Basketball Reference hasn't updated, 12.7 points, 5.4 rebounds, 70% from the field, 1.2 steals per game. And he's not taking any threes, which he's like 3 of 5 from 3 and hasn't shot one in like 6 games, which I love.
And I was going to get to that, because I think this season we have really seen Hami played in his perfect role, and the coaching staff putting him in positions to succeed where maybe on paper he's a wing, but he's almost purely been a true forward this season. And he's taking more shots at the rim than ever. That's always been his best skill. He's almost completely eliminated the three-point shot from his diet. I think last season, the season before, he was taking about at least one a game. Never been a high-volume guy, but still we're seeing him take threes every night. And he's not doing that now, even before the injuries that have sort of had him play spurts at the 5, which even that's has an upside, right? Like defensively does not work, but as far as him just being able to get the rebound, take off with it, there's been a lot of upside there. But as a whole, we've seen him operate out of the dunker spot a lot. He's been a very active cutter. He's been very active in transition. And just as a pure energy guy, we've seen him really find his niche without the ball, right? Just doing a lot of putback tipping stuff. He's always rebounded really well for a guard. In a way, he really is just like an undersized power forward, right?
He is.
And that's his role, and he's really thrived in that role. And, for a team that's been prone to go cold, just to have a guy like him who can bring off the bench and be an instant spark plug has really helped the team a lot.
Is it sustainable, Omari? Is it like I want to buy it. I want to buy Hami as a second unit 4-man, and he can really do this. Like, it's a real thing. And then I'm like, he's 6'4", he's 6'5", like there's no way. But he's super athletic. Like, I find myself just going back and forth because I don't know, like I'll take my victory lap a little bit with this. I've always thought this was the role for him. Like, make him a short roll guy and make him a dunker spot guy and a cutter, and he'll figure out how to do it defensively on the other end. You can switch with him if they put him in ball screens. I mean, he wasn't doing any worse against Valanciunas than Nerlens Noel was. I mean, they were going to have to double team Valanciunas either way, so at least Hami was an advantage offensively. How many times did we see him just get out in transition and he beat Valanciunas down the floor? I don't know that it ever works in the playoffs, but it could be a real regular season role, maybe. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I asked Dwayne about him playing the 5 after the game, and he poured cold water on it. He said, "No, just offensively,
Dwayne,
it doesn't work." And he might have taken my question a little bit more literally than I meant it, because I did ask him, "Is there any upside just what you see offensively them playing the 5?" And he was just like, "We're not going to do that to him." Having him go against opposing centers, but in general, like, I think you're right. I think he's a very unique player, and if he were good defensively, he'd probably give you a lot of what you get from like a player like a Josh Hart, right? But you don't quite get that. So that's, I think, sort of the issue is that offensively, I think that's sustainable. Like, I think he could always shoot around 55, 56% from the floor where he's at now, just because he's such a bouncy athlete. And he just outjumps a lot of players. And I think it's sort of sneaky because of his size anyway. But I think just if he could just be a pretty good wing defender, I think be like the complete player and would basically really solidify his role in the rotation. But you're always giving something up when he's on the floor. And that's why I think his current role now, where he's more of maybe like an 11th man, but if you have injuries or just need some sort of spark, you could plug him in. He's going to immediately give you that energy. There's a role for that in the NBA. As long as he's able to do what he's doing now, I think there will always be a role for what he does. But you mentioned the playoffs, and I also am curious if you could do that in the playoffs as well. Maybe in a small lineup, right? Like maybe if you can't play Duren and you have Isaiah out there at the 5, you're like, let's just play Hami at the 4, right? Maybe the game's a shootout, and let's just get some energy in there. There will always be a role for it. It's just, I know that there's always a clamor from the fan base to see him more than we do now. And the coaching staff tends to lean towards shooting. And I cannot say that that's the wrong approach, even though Hami has been really good. And I think it's making a very strong case for himself to play more minutes once they do get a little bit more healthy as a whole.
Well, I think this is proof that he can be good in his role, but if you expand the role too much, then we may not see as good of minutes from him. So I feel like I would like to see him just stay in this role. Don't expand it anymore. Don't ask him to start doing more. Just keep him in this. Maybe he comes back next year as the 11th man and just fills in at the 3 or 4, off the bench whenever somebody's out. I do want to touch on Saddiq Bey just a little bit. And, we've talked a little bit about a roller coaster season for the Pistons. The defense hasn't necessarily been a roller coaster. It's been pretty down pretty much the whole time. Jaden Ivey a little bit. Saddiq Bey. So I want to give you just some stats about this season. And I want to know whether you feel like, hey, this up and down is okay. Like you get these spurts where he scores the ball really well, or whether you would rather him be more consistent. But 11 games this season in single digits, Omari, 25% of the games played. But he also has 6 games this season with 25 plus points. Are you okay with that? Like, does that are you cool with that considering his role, especially when he settles into a role off the bench? Or would you rather see like a more consistent, just 16 points essentially every night, but there's not as big a variance?
I think the issue with Saddiq is the consistency for sure. I think even though he struggled to shoot from 3, we know that he can do that. And he's compensated in other ways, whether it's getting to the line, he's doing that at a career high rate. He's been a little bit better inside. There's things he's done. But I think a lot of that variance is just his lack of consistency as an outside shooter. So, I think even though like those 31-point outings and, just the times he's popped off have been good to see and obviously needed for a team that hasn't won that many games. If he were just a consistent 38% shooter every night, and maybe he's not seesawing as much, but you're getting a consistent 14 points every night, which you're getting now, but it's seesawing, right? You don't know what Saddiq you're going to get every single night. I think that consistency would probably be better for him and also better for the Pistons. And
I will say this, because I'm pretty proud. I went back and watched every single Saddiq Bey 3-point shot, Omari. And so I do feel like I can help the consistency a little bit. He is much better when he is on catch and shoot or off screens. I would love to see Saddiq eliminate some of the off the dribble stuff, especially early in games. Also, he's a much better 3-point shooter when he steps left-right into his 1-2 as opposed to right-left. And he has been shooting the ball very well in transition. So I would love to see them getting some more transition attempts as well. I did a whole breakdown. If you guys want to go read it, I try not to plug myself too much, but on Detroit Bad Boys, there was a whole article with I did different play types, shot locations, shot types, all of that stuff. But I do think maybe if he could, it's to your point as well, hone in a little bit on the stuff he does best. Like get rid of some of those other threes, take the ones he does best. The process of shot fake, drive into the lane, either get fouled or kick it out. I do think that would help that consistency with Sadiq just a little bit.
Yeah, first, read Bryce, read his analysis of Detroit Bad Boys. He does a lot of good stuff. He's a madman, and he will watch all the players' three-point attempts to give us that analysis we love. So I always support Bryce's work. But I also think something that hasn't been talked about as much is, to continue your point, I think Sadiq's better when he has to do less rather than more. And he's still growing parts of his game. But I think, and this isn't a knock on him, a lot of guys have thrived in this role, but you don't want him to have to make too many decisions, right? Either shoot, drive, pass. You don't necessarily want him to have to think on like 4 or 5 levels as far as how do I break down and get to the rim. That's just not his game. And the Pistons don't really need that from him. So it's not a knock on him. But I think he's also been hurt by Cade being out, because you need players who can kind of generate those looks. And Killian's been good. Ivy's been, like, he has a lot of gravity going downhill. Some games he's been great playmaking, some games not been as good. But just not having that steady presence every single night in a Cade Cunningham who can really get you those easier looks and commands that attention, I think has hurt Sadiq Bey as well. And the starting lineup was tough because, he has some issues defensively, and you have Boyan, and I think it was the right move to separate those two guys. But also the second unit, I think, often lacking that kind of high level creating, because you have to stagger Killian and Jaden, and like Burks can play some point guard and he commands attention, but there's still just, like, I think there's a lot of knock-on effects from Cade Cunningham's injury, and I think that's one, is that Sadiq is in a role again where he's probably having to do more than you need him to do, and just hasn't been good for his overall game, his overall efficiency. So it wouldn't shock me if next season Cade comes back and all of a sudden Sadiq's shooting better than 36% from 3 again. I don't think that's all of the reason why, but I do think that's negatively affected him the same way it's hurt Jaden and the rest of the team as a whole.
Well, and his role in general has bounced back and forth from starter to bench player, playing with Boyan, playing with different second unit guys. So that's sometimes hard to get into a rhythm as well. We're going to close it down there, Omari. Just a reminder to everybody, please, if you feel the need, rate, review, reach out. We love that stuff. Give us 5 stars. Help us continue to grow. Next week, the amazing Keith Smith will join us talking all things Pistons cap, salary, all of that stuff, off-season, trade deadline. It's going to be an incredible episode, especially one where we only have one game leading up anyway. And then episode 50, mark your calendars, Sunday, January 29th, the very first, the Pistons Pulse live show recording. Come watch with us, interact with us live as we record the episode. Omari, have you watched Schitt's Creek yet?
I have not watched Schitt's Creek. I will watch it. I always hear it's a really great comedy. And I also feel like the Free Press may hear the podcast and think that we're saying that the bad word, and we're not. So I'm just going to spell it. It is Schitt, correct?
Yes, that is. I wonder.
For those who are unaware,
I was like, am I okay to say it or not? Like, it's the name of the show. I'm obsessed, Omari. Like, I sit there, Randy and my wife, we sit there and we watch it, and I just laugh like I'm a little kid and like look completely ridiculous. I'm obsessed. I love it. I laugh at it all day. So I'm hoping you watch it. I hope you enjoy it as much. I don't know if we can be friends if you don't.
I'm gonna have to check it out. I've always heard it's one of the funniest sitcoms that have come out in recent years. I think it ended a couple of years ago, but it's one of those shows that's been on my list. And you texted me the other night, very excited. Have you watched Schitt's Creek? I have not watched it, so I'll check out a few episodes and check back, and we will revisit on the pod, on the future episode. Not next week because we have Keith Smith, but
Keith may have watched. We may have to ask Keith if he's watched.
We'll ask him. Like he might, yeah. Like I wouldn't be shocked if he's a fan. He seems like a guy that likes comedy, so
yeah,
we'll
no doubt
save that one for him.
All right, Omari, take it away, my guy.
All right. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. Big shout out to our editors, Kerry Jr. II and Robin Chan, our executive producer, Anjanette Delgado, and our sports editor, Kirkland Crawford. Also, shout out to Wes. We will check in next week with a very fun episode and I think very informative episode with Keith Smith. So check back next week. We'll be back.